Commandment 8, Part 2, Supporting Verses. The great thing about the Bible is that it has all sorts of verses that talk about the same things. By them doing this all throughout the Bible is able to stress the importance of different topics, and this 8th commandment of not stealing is no exception to this. The first verse that we're going to be talking about today is where the commandment is duplicated over in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 19, in which it says, "You shall not steal." This here is practically a word-for-word exact copy of the original commandment found over in Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. However, this isn't the only reference to stealing that we can find in the Old Testament. Verses like Proverbs chapter 6, verse 30 and 31, in which it says, "They do not despise the thief, for if he steals to satisfy his soul when he is hungry, but if he is found, he shall restore sevenfold, and he shall give all of the goods of his house." From this verse here, as it's talking about in this 31st verse, that whenever he is caught, that he will have to not just return whatever it was that was stolen, but is more serious than just that. It starts off by saying that he is needed 7 times. However, when you continue a little bit further into this verse, it says that the thief is needed to give away all of the goods of his house. By both of these examples and saying here, we can begin to paint the picture of how seriously that God wants us to take this idea of stealing from someone else. From a historical perspective, stealing has always been taken seriously. Roman law had penalties of death and flogging to return 4 to 5 times the stolen value. A lot of Islamic countries would have the punishment of losing whatever hand did the stealing by amputation, as both a public note that they had stolen before and also as a permanent reminder of the crime that was committed. Because of this, whenever we look back at the verse from Proverbs chapter 6, verse 30 and 31, we are able to see that this crime of theft is something that God does take pretty seriously. Back in this verse, it talks about how we are needing to repay back sevenfold. The law of the land from that time would only require them to pay back anywhere from 2 to 5 times. So the idea that the Bible is talking about is something that is closer to a complete and total compensation, leaving no question and no doubt that they have repaid their debt and they are forgiven for their transgressions. Other Bible verses that can be found talk about the guilt that comes with stealing. In Job chapter 20, starting in verse 19 and ending in verse 22, in which it says, "For he pressed down and forsook the poor, and stole a house, but he hath not built it. Surely he shall not know quietness in his belly. He will not escape with the things of desire. None of his food shall be left, therefore his good will not last. In the fullness of his plenty he shall be in trouble. Every wretched one shall come on him." Through these couple of verses, it talks about how they shall not know rest. It goes through a list here of how they will continue to be troubled. The poor are more vulnerable to expulsion due to their lack of resources and social standing. However, that in itself is no excuse to treat anyone any differently. This is why God always emphasizes the concern for justice and righteousness through commandments like loving one's neighbor, found in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. In these verses, it also talks about how we are not to be relying on the physical things of this earth. The thief might steal, but all that is just a temporary thing. It will all eventually run out or will not last the test of time, which is why we can find all sorts of verses in the Bible, like Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, that talk about spiritual rather than physical, and other verses like in Luke chapter 12, verses 16 through 21, that echo the same points of spiritual is so much more important than physical. Prosperity is something that is often linked to physical wealth or something else along those like possessions. However, through verses like this one we read over in Job chapter 20, verses 19 through 22, it instead gives light to that the physical things don't matter in the long run. The things that are quickly gained are quickly lost or spent. While this is a saying that is often referenced with money, the same is true whenever it comes to theft, which is part of the reason why we can find so many Bible verses that talk about how we are supposed to not steal and how we are instead supposed to be focusing on the things that will last, like our spiritual well-being and eternity.